the 15-inch Surface Book 2 after 2 months of using it. So first of all, let's discuss the main thing. It's the hinge. So this is not something you usually get from a notebook. This is something that's quite unusual, and you can just press this button and you wait until it turns green, and often it does, and then you can just take the screen off and then you have a tablet. That's the main feature. That's the main benefit of having a device like this. From what I understand, all the main computing is in this part, in the tablet part, because obviously the tablet has to function also without the base. And in the base is only the graphics card and an additional battery. So now what we have here is a symmetrical hinge that works, I guess, with magnets. So if you then take this thing and put it onto the other side, using the magnets and these ports, you attach it to one side and then you click it into the other side. You of course could also do it the other way around. And then as soon as it realizes that you now have it in, it realizes it and then it says detached. Now, design-wise, this is one of the nicest notebooks I have ever held in my hands. I used to watch the presentations of when this came out, the Microsoft presentations, and I just was so in awe about the design of this. First of all, we have the hinge. Now the hinge is not optimal. The big downside obviously is that it has this thing in here. And even though many have spoken about this, I think it still is not that practical. It's not that practical. Of course, it's a very nice hinge, but what I additionally want to add is this. If you have this anywhere, and then you put pressure onto this, then what happens, I think, is that the pressure is applied here and onto the hinge. If you have now a normal device, then think of this as now I'm pressing onto this, and of course the pressure is now not applied to only these two edges, but is applied throughout the entire surface. So if you have a normal notebook, then it is applied throughout the entire notebook. And I think in terms of durability, this might be a potential downside. I did not purchase this device. This is only a rental, so I also probably will not be able to say something about the long-term durability of this. The hinge works in a way that it actually extends itself, as you can see. The hinge is not one angular point in space where the rest basically angles around, but it actually is evolving in space, as you can see, and it's rotating not around one fixed surface point, but it is rotating around a point that changes actually. So it is very well made, and it is also kind of sturdy, even though compared to the HP SPECTRE, my normal notebook that is still in repair, because HP and repairs is a topic on its own, but it seems to be kind of good for the job. Now, here is already a big downside. Because so much is in here and so little is in here, there is a kind of an imbalance. It's not that there is too much of an imbalance, but if you have it like this, even though these probably are kind of the same weight, as you can see here, maybe the top is a little bit heavier. If you take this and move it up to here, and you then wobble a little bit, the base kind of lifts off. Now, additionally, if you do something else, like apply this to a stand and you have it on here, then it just often tips over, which is an issue, I guess. But not for everybody, but just for people like me who try to use an Anker Soundcore, for example, when working in the library. And then if you have this and you have the notebook on here, then it is just not a very sturdy construction actually. And also, obviously, it doesn't work like this because you cannot just put it on here, because the notebook itself doesn't have any rubber feet. It does have these two strips, but these two strips obviously only work if they are in contact with the surface, and they're also a little bit more on the slippery side. The design itself is just, I think, minimalistic, is simplistic, is, you could also say, marvelous. The fact that they didn't write Microsoft or Surface Book on here, but it is just this very simple design. They wrote Microsoft though on the bottom of the device. What I also like about the design is the clear-cut lines. It is geometrical. It is often symmetrical. Just think of, not think, but just take a look at this here. The keyboard is symmetrical. If you place your hands onto the keyboard, then they are symmetrical. So therefore, you don't need to alter your posture and over time maybe develop something like a head that always looks slightly off, which is something I have probably developed with my HP SPECTRE because it has a number pad on it. I didn't want the number pad, but I did get it because there was no other option for a device on this tier of specs. The touchpad, I think, is kind of okay. You have the more clicky part on the bottom, and then you have the less clicky part here, or just the part that has less travel actually. Now, these two, obviously, the arrows are quite small, so therefore this is kind of the standard on these smaller devices. What I also like is just how clean this looks here. There are no stickers on here, there is nothing else that is on here. There is also a lighting. You can turn it on by pressing this button here, but you can only see it if you turn off the light. So there are different levels to this, actually 3. Out, on, 2 and 3. What you can also see here is now the Windows Hello cameras, that I actually think aren't 2 as usual, but is only 1, because you also only saw 1 light, or 1 on this device is not working properly. Regarding the fan, here is a slot for the fan. Whether you are a fan of the Microsoft Surface Book or not, this here is one of the Microsoft Surface Book. Now, it barely does something, which is very nice. And compared to something like the SPECTRE, which has a fan that often turns up to 11, this either reduces then the performance of the whole device, or it just doesn't need to run this often. This actually has, I think, a 1060 built in, a 1060 graphics card. So the exact specifications of this device are Microsoft Surface Book 2, it's the 15-inch model. It comes with an i7. The display technology is called Pixel Sense, and it is 15-inch, and the resolution is 3240 multiplied by 2160, which results in 260 ppi. It's 10-point multi-touch. The aspect ratio is 3:2, which is quite unusual for notebooks because in the past most used to be 16:9. Contrast ratio is 1600:1. It has 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the i7 is the 8000 or 8650U quad-core processor, 4.2 GHz Max Turbo. In terms of security, you already saw the login camera, the Windows Hello camera. There is no fingerprint sensor. It has an ambient light sensor, proximity accelerometer, gyroscope and magnetometer. I didn't have problems to install Windows 11 on it, even though this is a rental, but you might have difficulties. I don't know about this specifically. In the box you get the charger, which I will show you after reviewing this mostly. It's 102 watts and it comes with this fancy charging port you also maybe already saw, which is kind of a MagSafe charging port, you could say. The weight is 1905 grams or 4.2 pounds, including the keyboard. The storage is an SSD, 1TB PCIe SSD. The battery life is up to 17 hours of video playback. The battery life, at least with this unit, which seems to be fairly new, seems to be fairly good, at least compared to my up to this point almost a 3-year-old HP SPECTRE 15, which wasn't that good anymore. It often only lasted like 4 hours after a charge, not even. Talking graphics, we have the PixelSense display, and we then either have Intel HD Graphics 620 integrated GPU, or we have on the i7 the GeForce GTX 1060 discrete GPU with 6 GB of GDDR5 graphics memory, which in terms of these 2-in-1s is almost as good as it can get. The SPECTRE, for example, had a 1050, also the mobile version obviously, I guess, but it also came out a few years ago. The camera on the front is 1080p, seemingly 5 megapixel, but we also have another camera on the rear that also has 1080p, but seems to have 8 megapixels and also autofocus. We also have dual microphones, front-facing stereo speakers with Dolby Audio, which sounded like absolute garbage. Not at least compared. My HP SPECTRE has very good speakers, had also the previous generations. Sometimes if you get a version of a model you then need to send back, then the speakers are just not good at all. But if you get one that actually properly works from HP, then the speakers are pretty fine. And compared to these speakers, but also just compared to the speakers on my phone, these are just very bad. In terms of wireless, we have a Wi-Fi IEEE 802.11, if that says anything to you. We have also Bluetooth Wireless 4.1 and Xbox Wireless built in the 15-inch only. The exterior is made of magnesium, the color is silver, and I don't think there's another color. I would have preferred black, but there are none. And the physical buttons are the volume rocker here and also the power button. In terms of ports, we have 2 USB-A, and these are version 3.1 Gen 1, and we have 1 USB Type-C, which is the same version and the same generation, which is on the other side. Noteworthy, this is not Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt would have either 20 megabits per second or gigabits per second. So Thunderbolt would have either 20 if it's single lane or maybe it's 2 lanes. So according to Wikipedia, Thunderbolt 1 had 2 channels 10 gigabits per second each, 20 gigabits in total. Thunderbolt 2 then had 20 gigabits per second in total, and Thunderbolt 3 and 4 have 40 gigabits bidirectional. This here is none of that. It's only, I think, 10 gigabits per second with... So, Generation 1 of 3.1 USB supports 5 gigabits per second, whereas USB 3.1 Gen 2 would support 10, but apparently this here is not supporting this. Which just might be a knockout criteria for you, at least for this version, the Microsoft Surface Book 2, because maybe you just need the Thunderbolt. We also have the headphone jack, which is here, so it needs to be on the tablet side, because otherwise, if you just took the tablet and wanted to watch a movie on your tablet, then the problem obviously is, if you then don't have the headphone jack here, that you can just not connect your headphones. The downside is, if you then connect your headphones and you have it in laptop mode, then the cable is coming from here. Then on Microsoft.com, it says there are 2 times Surface Connect ports, but I actually can only see 1. And this is where the charger attaches, which is this one, and then you can just take it off. So it's very nice. Only downside is if you use it in a mode where you have the display in the front, as in the beginning, and you use the display, then this is coming from the back, let's just say. And then what happens is that you cannot really connect it properly, unless you then have it like this, which is obviously not the best for the cable. So this would be going to the back, and then you would have the display in the front. So also in this here, in this direction, it blocks obviously the port, so you would have to move it otherwise. So if you just have it in normal notebook mode, this is obviously fine, but if you now turn it around and the cable comes from the back, then you just hurt the cable all day long, which is also kind of a result of the cable just being very short. Then there is also a full-size SDXC card reader, which is very nice, so you can use both If you have an adapter, you can use micro USB or you just use normal USB cards. Not USD, but SD cards. And it also seems to be compatible with the Surface dial. So this is actually a knob that you can then probably put on and off the screen, at least according to Microsoft. This screen is reflecting, it's not anti-reflecting, and there is also no privacy feature, at least to my knowledge. This is then what it looks like. In terms of resolution, I had the 4K SPECTRE before, and I also did not notice that much of a difference. So I did not really inspect it closely. 4K is obviously a higher resolution, but it seems just alright to me. In terms of brightness, let's crank it up to the max. As you can see here, this is the brightest it can be. I do have a kind of bright studio light, but it's also not that bright. But the HP SPECTRE, for example, just was not bright enough that I could actually work in normal lighting conditions. So usually I have to kind of work behind something because otherwise I cannot see something during the day. So taking the HP SPECTRE, for example, outside was just not possible because I just couldn't see anything during the day. And then this is the lowest it can go. The touchscreen seems fine to me. In terms of pen, I did not have the original Surface pen, but I did have my pen from HP, which I could also use. Let's, by the way, also test out the speakers. As you can hear, as usual, the Windows sound is a little bit distorted. So now in terms of writing on here, it works. The HP pen does not have a tilt, which the Surface pen I think does. So for this reason you could also do things like here and then get different thicknesses. But here you cannot, so therefore that's kind of the limitation. On the HP pen you do have a rubber, and this is quite similar to the Surface pen. This HP pen I have charges with USB-C, which is quite nice, and it also has an additional button I can use to start OneNote, for example, and I think the Surface pen also has one button. Let's talk keyboard. In the beginning I thought the keyboard is so nice, but it turns out, compared to the HP, which has a very nice keyboard actually, which I quite like, apart from the fact that it is off-center, this keyboard seems to be very nice, but actually you don't really know when exactly you hit something. And this is something I noticed again and again. There is no real endpoint to this, it's just one. So if this is the pressure curve, if this is time, and this is the pressure curve, then it seems to be kind of equal. Whereas ideally you would expect that first it is very easy. So if this is the amount of force you need, first it is very easy and then it has one endpoint. So basically you press and then it ends. But this is not so much the case here. So it is kind of mushy, you could say. And I found myself that I just type wrong things all day long. It may be because I am used to this off-center keyboard, and I'm also just used to a slightly different keyboard, but even now after 2 months, I still am just writing very badly, and I'm constantly writing mistakes on this. Let's talk different use cases. So obviously this is a very unique device. So for this reason, I thought I would also display the different use cases. So usually it seems to now work quite properly once you figured out how it works and how long exactly you have to wait. It also shows you how long you have to wait, but there is just, in the beginning it was just weird, and then you click the button, and then obviously this also needs to be turned on. So Windows needs to be running, and then you can only turn this button. If there is a software issue and so on and so forth, you cannot detach it. Compare this to the HP SPECTRE, which is just a lot easier in terms of handling, I think. If you have the HP SPECTRE, then you can just take the screen and just flip it to the other side. And of course you cannot rotate the screen 160 degrees, but you can just take the screen and flip it to the other side. Obviously the downside to this is if you take the screen and flip it to the other side, that then the keyboard is on the bottom. If the keyboard is on the bottom on any 2-in-1 device that has one hinge that doesn't detach, then the problem is that you cannot use the keyboard, obviously, and therefore for this reason usually the keyboard also doesn't function anymore. With this device it's a little bit different. The keyboard actually still functions and it is still connected to the main device. So for this reason you could also use this in order to have this as a setup. So think of you going to the library and then typing on a different level where your screen actually would be. So you could detach it and then use it as a Bluetooth keyboard. So if we just type in random things right now, or we try to navigate right now, then it doesn't work. So I thought it would work, but if we type on here right now, then it doesn't show anything. So either it's something I still need to figure out, or it is not usable as a Bluetooth keyboard, but I just think it might not be possible that Microsoft hadn't thought of a scenario like this, especially with a so unique device like this. So now, the different modes you can do on here. Obviously the normal notebook mode, we already saw this. Then you can just take the device and detach it. So now the unique feature about this device is that now you can still use the keyboard. If it's attached, then you obviously can use the keyboard. Of course you cannot use it properly, and you can also not see the screen, but in this scenario, if you need to detach it, you obviously need to access the keyboard, which you would not be able to do on a HP SPECTRE, for example, or another 2-in-1 360 device actually. So this is more maybe the 2-in-1, and the HP could be more seen as the 360 device that actually flips around. Because this is actually really 2-in-1. It's a tablet and the other thing, whereas the other one is not so much a tablet, it is constantly a notebook, which also has a tablet mode, you could say. If you now have it like this, there are of course different possibilities. You could, for example, take something like this and now angle the whole thing, which is a very nice feature, I guess. So in this scenario, for example, I could now write very easily. So if I'm in a lecture and I need to write things down, but the surface is flat and I need to have my surface on kind of a leveled surface, because it's better to write this way, because you have to not constantly look down and look up again, because it's more similar in terms of the line of sight. So you could imagine a scenario where this would actually work. Of course, you could also imagine a scenario where you put multiple things on here and then you could have it like this. What you can also very easily do with this here, since it also is so flat, is you can use the bottom here, and the bottom is still the bottom. So if you have HP SPECTRE, then you constantly worry about scratching your keyboard if you want to now show things to somebody else. So let's go back to this scenario where you want to show things to somebody else. Then you can just use this and you actually have the real bottom on the bottom, which is nice. One could also imagine a scenario where I would make videos and I would just draw on here instead of my usual whiteboard. And this would be a scenario that I actually already tried. In addition, you can just take the tablet again and just use it as a device, obviously. Obviously, the main selling point of a device like this is that you can detach the tablet, that you can use the tablet. What I found of myself is that this device seems so vulnerable. I do not have a case for it. There are cases seemingly for it. There are no cases for the HP SPECTRE for it, but I would feel more secure if I had a case like this. And maybe you could imagine, for example, you are working in housing and you would walk around with a device like this, marking up things and presentations. I could also imagine that people who are actually working in construction, for example, could just use a device like this. Having this maybe as a slightly mobile workstation and then taking off the device whenever they need in order to have presentations, but also the facts on here and so on and so forth. It is a full-blown PC. It is a full-blown workstation. And this is the main selling point for a device like this in general, but also specifically for a device like this. I rarely found myself using my HP SPECTRE as a tablet walking around, because also if you take this and it's 2 kilograms, so each side has usually, I guess, 1 kilogram if it's equally distributed, then holding something like this also comes at a much higher risk of actually maybe dropping it. And 2 kilograms is kind of heavy. I think the HP SPECTRE 15 weighs a lot less actually. So this is quite a chunky thing actually. Let's talk price. Microsoft Surface devices are on the pricier side. And if you compare this to a decently or comparably just a device similar in terms of performance and also the graphics card, basically my old SPECTRE, it cost me 2,200 euros. This device here, as it lays here, costs 3,000 euros, basically, at this point in time. And I think they haven't even, so there is a Surface Book 3 that has been coming out, but this doesn't even have like 2 terabytes of storage, which HP on the other side offers. And this, in total, is a very good package. It only comes with 1 terabyte, which is a little bit too little for me, because I think of the device itself as also having basically an internal SSD that I would otherwise externally buy. But if I pay basically the premium in the device, then I have it in the device, which is the reason I had the 2 terabytes on my HP Spectre. If I compare the performance, then this seems to do quite fine, even though it often was low in disk space, usually because, well, I just had a little bit too many files. I basically have all files on here. But I also tried is OneDrive, so syncing with OneDrive only the files that are in demand, but this just has lags and lags and lags all the time. So I do not know if compared to my Spectre, it was due to the OneDrive syncing issue and the file issue with storage space, basically, that just limited the speed at which, for example, large file folders or image folders would load, but this just was very bad in terms of my experience. The touchscreen is fine. I guess it's even a little bit better, probably compared to the Microsoft Surface. Compared to the HP Spectre, the pen, I couldn't test the pen because I didn't get delivered a pen, but I guess it's also fine. What is also noteworthy is the image ratio and the screen ratio, much more the screen ratio. I found this to be quite comfortable actually, because if you think about a 16:9 ratio, then if you divide your screen into 4 different parts, then each part is kind of elongated a little bit too much, similar to a phone. Think of this as a phone, basically. Then you would have kind of 4 phones, a little bit bigger, obviously. And this is just not a very good mode for a lot of programs, because we also see kind of in this frame, and 16:9 just seems to be a little bit too large. A downside to not having 16:9 is obviously if you just want to record your notebook screen, then you have a different format. You then need to first reformat your notebook screen in order to then record native 16:9 video without totally cutting something off all the time. I found the 3:2 to be better, actually. I also was looking forward to trying this, and I still now think it is the better format. The newer HP Spectre, which I now also took a look at, is actually, in which you already saw, also comes in a slightly higher format, which I think is also nice. Another big upside comparing it to my HP Spectre is that these here, the screen bezels, are similar on all sides and equal on all sides. As you can see here, the reflective screen is sometimes maybe a little bit too reflective if you have it on normal brightness. Of course it looks nice because this mirroring effect, but it also has the downside of being less visible. In total, I will not get this device myself. I actually, as of yesterday, because my HP Spectre now still is in repair and I still need to pay basically the rent for this notebook, I think it might even make sense to now upgrade to the next Spectre, because at some point in time I would have anyway, and it's now almost 3.5 years, I guess, since I got the initial Spectre, and since it wasn't up to date at point of release or at point of purchase, it is actually more like, it has come out like 4 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago. And since I currently pay 145 euros for this, as long as HP doesn't manage to repair my notebook, I thought about, actually, what would be my next notebook? I took a look at the newer Surface devices, and there is just nothing in for me. There is not even something available with 2 terabytes. Additionally, the Thunderbolt situation, I think the newer ones have actually Thunderbolt, but this device, for example, still costs 3,000. Compare this to the HP Spectre, which now the best edition you can get with 2 terabytes of hard drive storage and 32 gigabytes of RAM, and also an i7, so pretty comparable, you could say, comes at 2.2 thousand euros. So it's basically switching from HP to Microsoft would mean a 50% price increase, which just makes this option not a very good option, I guess. So basically now I could get this here for 3,000, but it has not even 2 terabytes of storage. Or I could get a brand new Spectre, which has the flipping mechanism, which I actually prefer, because it is also just less fragile. If you sit in a train, for example, and then you try to flip it around, or in an airplane, having a device that is just basically already fixed, that you can rotate and so on and so forth, but not having the hinge, even though the hinge obviously is the main benefit of a device like this, maybe just not having it might be the better option, especially since the Surface is so much more expensive compared to HP, for example.